Cylinder gauge. Selection of cylinder gauges and replacement rods. Assembling the cylinder gauge. Using the cylinder gauge to measure a cylinder bore. An appropriate replacement rod should always be selected when you use a cylinder gauge. The stroke of a cylinder gauge is only 2 millimeters. That is, the measuring range is 2 millimeters. Select an appropriate replacement rod so that the center of the measuring range corresponds with the expected value of a bore size. In other words, obtain the measuring range in the scope of plus and minus 1 millimeter of the expected size. For example, when measuring a bore whose standard size is 87.01 to 87.02 millimeters, consider the central value of the measuring range is about 87 millimeters. Accordingly, the ideal measuring range is from 86 to 88 millimeters. A number inscribed on a replacement rod should be equal to the center value of the measuring range of the cylinder gauge to which the replacement rod is installed. Accordingly, in this example, you select a replacement rod to obtain 87 millimeters. In practice, a replacement rod is calibrated in 5 millimeters. Then, select an 85 millimeter replacement rod and a 2 millimeter spacer to make 87 millimeters. Then loosen the rod installation screw. Insert the rod. If you use a spacer or spacers, place it between the gauge and rod. And retighten the rod installation screw. Next, loosen the stop knob and insert a dial gauge gently into the cylinder gauge. Tighten the stop knob securely when the dial gauge is inserted to the point where the needle of the indicator makes about a half turn. Zero a cylinder gauge before measuring the cylinder bore. First, consider the expected size as the reference size, and set the micrometer to the reference size. Place a cylinder gauge between the anvil and spindle of the micrometer that is set to the reference size. With this state, align the zero scale of the dial indicator to its needle. This zero indicates the reference size that is 87 millimeters here. When aligning the scale with the needle, view the needle from the front side for a correct reading. Insert the cylinder bore gauge into the cylinder carefully and move it slowly straight down to the measuring point. Find the maximum value on the dial indicator and record it as the measured value. If the measured value is larger than the reference size, the cylinder bore size is obtained by subtracting the measured value from the reference size. On the other hand, if the measured value is smaller than the reference size, the cylinder bore size is obtained by adding the measured value to the reference size. In this example, the reading of the dial indicator is 0.01 millimeters smaller than the reference size. Therefore, the cylinder bore size at this measuring point is 87 millimeters plus 0.01 millimeters equals 87.01 millimeters. When measuring the point of a different angle, bring out the gauge once from the cylinder, change its direction, and then insert it again straight down to the measuring point. Do not turn the cylinder gauge in the cylinder bore.